and welcome to this really special webinar looking at EU and UK's foreign policy. What a week, what a day to be having this conversation. We have some of the world's top leaders swooping into the UK for the Group of Seven meeting. The ruling Conservative Party here in the UK is discussing its commitment to international development, and the US President has expressed his deep concern on the subject of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the post-Brexit trade border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And that's just today. We still are hugely concerned with two global emergencies, the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis. And there are lots of other issues that are engaging the thoughts of foreign policy practitioners. It's a really busy time, so I'm so delighted our esteemed guests have been able to join us to step away from the corridors of power in London and Strasbourg. Tom Tugendhat MP and David McAllister MEP, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Penny Richards, I'm the head of the Aspen Institute in the UK, and I'm delighted to introduce this webinar, co-planned and co-hosted jointly by Aspen UK and the EU delegation to the UK. Our two organisations work together to bring you discussions on some of the most important issues that affect both the UK and the European Union. And it's particularly good to be sharing a platform today with Ambassador Vale de Almeida, the head of the EU delegation here. And we're also really lucky we are able to invite some of the UK's top journalists to lead our conversations. Today is absolutely no exception as we have Catherine Philp with us. Before I introduce Catherine, a very quick word about today's webinar. There'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions of the panelists. Please put those questions in the Q&A tab. I know that David, Tom, and Catherine will be very happy to answer as many as possible. But before that, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Catherine Philp. She is the diplomatic correspondent and foreign policy leader writer for the Times newspaper. She's reported for the Times from 5 continents and has been based in Jakarta, Delhi, Baghdad, Jerusalem, Beirut, and Washington. And we're really lucky to have her here because I know that almost directly afterwards, she's running down to Cornwall to meet the G7 leaders. Catherine, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you everyone for joining us for this this seminar at an extraordinary time, as discussed. So much going on that it is extraordinary that we've actually got such a distinguished panel here. One of those, however, Ambassador Vale de Almeida, will have to leave us very shortly. So I'd like to first of all invite him to make some opening remarks before he has to return to this very important meeting.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you, Penny, and most of all, thank you, Tom Tugendhat and David McAllister, for joining us today. It's a very timely meeting, I must say. When we planned it, I don't think we were fully aware of its timeliness, but in fact, it is a very interesting week. And allow me to just my day's agenda, because it reflects a little bit that, I started at 8 o'clock in the morning with a meeting, the first meeting ever of the Joint Partnership Council between the EU and UK, bringing together Maros Šefčovič and David Frost. We continued with a slightly more difficult meeting on the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol within the setting of the joint committee of the withdrawal agreement, and I'll be hosting in 20 minutes a meeting of the EU ambassadors in London to have a discussion with Vice President from the European Commission. But later on in the day, like many others, I'll be traveling to Cornwall to participate in the G7 summit and hosting the two presidents of the European Council and the European Union. And this gives you an idea of how much we are working together with our friends in the United Kingdom, sometimes in full convergence, sometimes in slightly divergent ways, but still aiming at cooperation on big issues that affect our citizens and our economies. And that's why it is so important that we have today two leading actors in foreign policy formulation, Tom Tugendhat and David McAllister, whom I respect a lot, with links of friendship being built in our common activities around common causes, but also that we are hosting equally important parliamentarians. They will be leading, and they have led, a dialogue between namely the European Parliament and the House of Commons, but I think they will play a very important role in the future shaping of EU-UK relations. We are beginning a new cycle. We have left Brexit, maybe not entirely, but we are definitely starting a new cycle. And I would like this cycle to have a strong and important foreign policy, external relations dimension. And who better to address these issues than David and Tom. So I really look forward to this discussion, although unfortunately I'll not be able to attend it all, but my colleagues are in the line, they will brief me fully. And most importantly, I think it's a great occasion for all our listeners and viewers to be able to share the views of Tom and David. And I look forward to our future conversations à trois in different instances. And I look forward to also a strong partnership between the European Parliament and the House of Commons and the House of Lords for that matter. So I'm going to leave you now. I'm terribly sorry for this, but I leave you in very good hands of Penny and Catherine. And I look forward to meeting all of you, in particular Tom and David, very soon, maybe in London, maybe in Brussels or Strasbourg. And to all the audience, please continue to stay tuned to Aspen, but also to us. We want to promote an informed, balanced, constructive discussion among all of us, and most of all, a balanced and dynamic and constructive partnership between the EU and the UK. Thank you very much. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We appreciate those opening comments. Well, obviously, this is possibly not the day that we expected to be holding this discussion, but I think in the spirit of positivity, we're going to look past the current rather fraught discussions towards perhaps how the EU and the UK can move past this moment and work together in foreign policy. I've noticed that the EU Commission Vice President has just said that the EU is at a crossroads with our relationship with the UK and that trust needs to be restored. And that does seem like a first step. Tom and David, I would like to invite you as foreign policy specialists and parliamentarians to reflect on why cooperation between the UK and the EU in the field of foreign policy is so important, and that it is so important we get past the current impasse towards that. What makes you feel positive about how that might develop? And does it matter that there is not a formal mechanism for consultation and cooperation? And perhaps you could address some of the ways that you think that cooperation could unfold. Tom, could I start with you?
Of course, and I'm delighted to be here. And Ambassador, it's a great pleasure to hear from you. And with any luck, maybe we'll actually get to meet physically one day. Though we seem to be in the same town, we only ever see each other online. It's a huge pleasure to be here with David, because David has become a very good friend and a very, very valued colleague. And I use the term entirely appropriately, because we are working together. We're fundamentally working together on challenges that face the people of the European Union and the people of the United Kingdom. We're facing challenges that range from, as we know, the destabilization of the international order that we're seeing from China to the environmental threats that we're seeing around the world, and indeed, slightly odd to say it on this forum perhaps, but the technology that is bringing us together, but also in some ways dividing us. And finding ways to work together between similarly minded democracies, between free peoples, peoples who are based on the rule of law, people whose ideas stem from a similar wellspring, is exactly why the UK and the European Union need to work together. That doesn't mean we shouldn't also be working with many other partners around the world, from Canada, the United States, Australia, Japan, and many others besides. But there is a simple truth, which is that over the last several thousand years, our people have grown up together, and we share many of the similar ideas. Now, that means that some of the words that I'm hearing at the moment leave me a little bit more sorry than encouraged. And that's because when I see the conversations that are happening between the UK government and some members of the European Union's Commission. There is, I think, a short-termism in both ends. And the short-termism is that it looks at the current problems and seems to suggest that actually what we're seeing is an increasing problem. I think we should reframe this conversation. We should reframe it because we should recognize that actually the values that we have fought for and largely won over the last 8 decades have now informed many of the free peoples and many of the free societies around the world. And those values are values that we share fundamentally, even if we disagree on some areas and some minor areas. Now, those values are, of course, everything from freedom of speech and association to individual opportunity, the pursuit of happiness, a wonderful phrase from the US Constitution, and indeed the opportunity to engage, to travel, and to communicate. So I have to say, I see a very positive future between the United Kingdom and the European Union. I see a very hopeful sharing of a future world which is working more and more in a way that I think promotes those areas of happiness, individual rights, collective action, and indeed community consciousness. And so I think that there's an awful lot that we can do together. Now, I look forward to hearing from David, and I look forward to taking questions, but I think it would be wrong for all of us to overstate today's tactical challenges when the real strategic win is so easily envisioned before us.
Thank you, Tom, for that. David, I'd like to put the same question to you. What are the points of positivity looking forward for this relationship?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm happy to be with all of you, and warm greetings from Strasbourg. For the first time after nearly 60 months, the European Parliament is back here at the Franco-German border in the great city of Strasbourg. As expected, I can only underline what Tom Tugendhat just said. Tom is a voice of reason in British politics and in the UK Conservative Party. As regards EU-UK relations, well, we negotiated for nearly 4 years 2 unprecedented agreements. They were both hard-fought, the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement. We're now about to establish a new kind of relationship. I do hope it will be a real partnership, because the United Kingdom will never be a simple third country for us in the European Union, not only because of the 46 years we were together in our family of nations, but the United Kingdom is an important political partner for the European Union and its member states in G7, in G20, in the Council of Europe, in OSCE, in the Security Council of the United Nations, and of course, the United Kingdom is a rock-solid and loyal NATO ally. Unfortunately, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement doesn't contain any provisions on foreign policy and security cooperation. The European Parliament, across party lines, regrets that the agreement doesn't include this. The TCA does include a chapter on cybersecurity and several elements relating to counterterrorism, but there was no will on the UK side to negotiate on foreign affairs, security and defense. I understand that the TCA is a living agreement. It will be adopted over the years. The UK Prime Minister always likes to say Brexit is done. Well, Brexit may be done, but the consequences of Brexit will keep us busy for years or even decades. We have all possibilities to find ways to broaden and deepen our EU-UK partnership in the upcoming years. And as regards foreign policy, security and defense, despite nothing being negotiated in the TCA, and even though the political declaration actually promised something differently, we share so many common goals in London and in our 27 capitals when it comes to conflict prevention, peace and security matters. I believe we can, and I believe we should move forward together, tackling climate change, countering global threats to democracy, or also strengthening transatlantic relations. So despite all the difficulties we are facing, just today, after the meeting of the Partnership Council and the Joint Committee, and here I do understand we are at a bifurcation, I still believe that in general, the EU and the UK should continue to work together as closely as possible, of course, always respecting the red lines drawn by the UK government. If you leave the EU, if you leave the single market, if you leave the customs union, you cannot have the same close cooperation relationship as before.
Thank you, David. So I think what you're both expressing really is that the UK and EU have got to find their way towards a new way of working based on those shared values. Shared values is obviously very much a hallmark of the upcoming G7 meeting and its proposed expansion into a D10. And it's also President Biden's first trip overseas. He will be coming to the UK for the G7, and then he'll be going for the EU-US meeting in Brussels and a NATO meeting before going to meet Vladimir Putin in Switzerland. He's made it very clear, especially if you read his op-ed in the Washington Post that he wrote on the occasion of this trip, that he would really like to see the differences between the UK and the EU overcome, and that he's treating this as one European trip, not as a trip to Britain and then Europe. And I wondered, David, maybe I could start with you on this, whether you think that having a new American president with a more positive view of Europe, whether he can act in some positive way to help the UK and the EU find a new way of working together on foreign policy in tandem with allies across the Atlantic.
First of all, there are 27 member states in the European Union, and I wish there were even more European countries a member of our community. But for 27 EU member states means that there are 20 countries in Europe who aren't members of the European Union. So you always will have to differentiate between the European Union and Europe. When it comes to transatlantic relations, well, the relationship between the European Union and the United States went through a difficult phase from 2017 to 2020. We were at a low. We have high expectations in Brussels that our relations will improve, and they have already started to improve. I think the most important thing is that the US administration, the European Commission, and also the governments, the national governments, that they are talking to each other and not about each other. I see 4 fields of close transatlantic cooperation: trade, then the second field is technology and digitalization. The third field is multilateralism, how to preserve the rules-based order. And finally, what the president has described as an alliance of democracies. We have to get together with like-minded partners, not only the United States and the EU 27, but also the United Kingdom, Canada, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, India, Indonesia, South Africa, countries which, of course, will have different views on certain issues, but what we have in common is that we believe in the rule of law. We are democracies. We are in favor of opposition rights, media freedom, civil liberties. So I think there's a lot on the agenda for transatlantic, to improve the transatlantic relations. I think the first step we need to do now is, from an EU point of view, is to work on trade. I'm not sure that we will be able to conclude an EU-US trade agreement, something similar to what was discussed under the name of TTIP. But what we can do is that step by step, we stop these unnecessary trade fights. And in recent weeks, we have already seen some positive steps as regards the tariffs on steel and aluminium, or also the controversy around the state aid for Airbus and Boeing. So let's focus on these 4 fields. And I think it's a very, very important step that the US president, in the first months of his term, is visiting NATO, the bedrock of our security in Europe, and also will come together with EU leaders for starting a new, much better, hopefully, phase of transatlantic relations than the 4 years under President Trump.
Thank you, David. And the same question to you, Tom. How do you see the 3 powers of the US, the UK, and the EU working together in the field of foreign policy from now on?
I'm reminded of the signing of the North Atlantic Charter in the dark days of towards the end of the last war, when the real genius of the drafters of it, in fact, the real genius of Churchill's drafting of it, was not to make it an Anglo-US alliance, but to make it broader. He made it a European pact with the US and the UK. He made it, quite deliberately, a pact of free countries based on the rule of law, and which were specifically designed to defend not just the liberties of Europeans, but recognizing that without the liberties of Europeans, there was no liberty in the UK and no liberty in the United States. And so having a US president who builds on the tradition of that and having a vision for a genuine partnership between those 3 pillars, as you put it, Catherine, I think is brilliant for Britain, frankly. I think that having a US president who has a huge interest in Ireland is wonderful. This is a person who has a huge influence and a huge interest in a part of the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland. This is a US president who has demonstrated over, I was going to say 30 years, it's more actually like 50 years. He was in the Senate since, just around the time I was born, and has been demonstrating his commitment to Europe since those days. So I think there is an opportunity for us in this new US administration. I'm reminded, actually, forgive me for focusing on it, but if you look at David, on one side, he has the European flag that we recognize. On the other, you may recognize the white horse of Lower Saxony. It's also, by the way, the white horse of Kent, because the connections between our 2 peoples are very deep. And when Widukind was riding against Charlemagne in various different adventures, in fact, that's where the white horse comes from. It's a memory of the independence of different European states under a European empire, or rather against a European emperor. He was part of a trans-Saxon empire, and trans-Jutish as well, which included the UK. And that's why we see the horse of Lower Saxony on the arms of the monarch of the UK up until not that long ago, under the symbol of Hanover and the Hanoverian dynasty. And we see this very, very deep connection between us. So look, I think David's absolutely right. We have found a settlement under the TCA, which will evolve. We have found a different way of working together, which I hope is going to build on trade. Of course I do, but I also hope it's going to build on things like the military partnership that we have with France through the Entente Cordiale, now interpreted through Lancaster House and through the Sandhurst agreements, that I hope will build on the incredibly close intelligence sharing relationship that we have with Germany, and through the amazing partnership we have with countries like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Netherlands and Denmark. I mean, I can run through many, many countries and point to the individual relationships that we have that are close and precious. Not all of them through the EU. Many of them are bilateral, others are through NATO, and many others still are through organizations like the WTO. So I'm very positive about a future. Now, how structured will it be? That's hard to say. There are challenges to structured conversations, and I hope David won't mind me saying this, but there are troubles with structured conversations on foreign policy, even within the 27. And there is, I think it's fair to say, there isn't a single EU foreign policy. There are many, understandably, different foreign policies, depending on which nation is viewing which areas. Now, I don't think that this should mean that we shouldn't have a regular engagement, and I would like to see a regular engagement between the UK and our European friends, but it should be one that is flexible and doesn't necessarily tie us all in together. I am reminded, of course, that when people look too negatively at the change that we've seen in the last 5 years, that Britain's relationship with the European Union as a member lasted for roughly the same amount of time as the Hohenzollern Empire lasted in Germany. And yet Germany is still a strong and prosperous country at peace with its friends and neighbors. And I'm sure that a changing status does not necessarily see us fall into rivalry if we realize that competition amongst friends is a great strength.
Thank you, Tom. Quite the history lesson there. No, it's good. I'm catching up on a lot. Well, one of the, I suppose, the elephant in the room at this weekend's G7, although there's going to be a lot of discussion on vaccine equity, pandemic recovery, and of course the climate. One of the big elephants in the room is going to be how to deal with rising China and how democracies should work together to contain China and also to strengthen their supply lines and make democracies resilient in the face of a resurgent China. And that has been an issue of some disagreement before within the EU and amongst different member countries. But I think we could say there's been quite a recent shift in Europe's view of China. I think since Beijing put sanctions on both British and European parliamentarians in retaliation for those put on Chinese officials over Xinjiang, it now looks questionable whether the EU-China investment deal will ever go ahead. It's been shelved for the moment. So do you see Britain, America and the EU moving closer together on a consensus of how to approach China? David, if you'd like to take that one.
Yes, I see the European Union, the United Kingdom, United States, but also other allies and partners move closer together as regards China. We all know that China is increasingly asserting itself on the international scene. This was already the trend before the current crisis, but the coronavirus pandemic has accentuated it further. With the recent imposed sanctions on EU politicians, organizations, but also on UK politicians, it becomes even clearer than before that we in the European Union, probably the same in the UK, we need to frame our approach to China and we need to follow our own path in line with our values and instruments. I would always support an engagement with China that is principled, practical, and pragmatic. And as we have often discussed in the European Parliament, our policy regarding China should be based on the following three principles: cooperate where possible, compete where needed, and confront and also contain where necessary. So that's where we are. How to deal with China should also be part of our transatlantic our transatlantic discussions. We will not always be of the same opinion as the Americans, how to deal with certain aspects of China, but in general, we have the very same approach. China is a lot of different things in one. It can be a cooperation partner. It is an important economic competitor, but clearly communist-led China is a geopolitical rival and also a systemic rival. The communists in Beijing don't share the same interests and values as we do. They have a totally different understanding how to organize the society. They are anti-democratic, they are anti-free speech. And I must say the treatment of the Uyghurs in Western China is, for me, the worst systematic violation of human rights of a national minority the world has seen in decades. And we have to be very outspoken on this. And I'm happy to see that our friends in the UK have a similar idea than we do in the European Union. Just one point, because Tom was saying how difficult it is to formulate joint policy statements on foreign policy, security and defence. Well, Tom, now that the UK has left, other countries are trying to fill your role, blocking unanimous decisions. We've just seen a few unfortunate examples in recent weeks, which makes me once again underline, I believe we have to move away from unanimity on foreign affairs in the European Union, at least in selected areas of foreign policy. We should move forward as regards sanctions, how to deal with human rights violations. This would allow the EU to act more swiftly, more ambitiously, and more sovereign from divide and rule strategies of third countries. The problem is with moving away from unanimity is that, first of all, you need a unanimous decision in favor of that. And in the moment, there are some member states that are against this. But I would support the call of Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas that we should really use the options we have under the existing treaties to move away from.
Before I come back to Tom on China, can I just ask you, how do you think that the EU managed to be quite so quick over Belarus and bringing in sanctions? And did that have anything to do with the fact that Britain moved first?
Well, if you remember the first round of sanctions, it took the European Union much longer than the UK, Canada, or the United States. It's because in this case it wasn't Hungary, in this case it was our dear member state Cyprus, which was trying to mix how to deal with President Erdogan and the assertive behavior of Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean with how to deal with dictator Lukashenko. So we lost a number of valuable weeks last autumn, and this was for me another example why I find it difficult if one country can block a decision of 26 others. It took us a few weeks. Now, after this outrageous hijacking of the Ryanair flight from Athens to Vilnius, the European leaders immediately, all 27 said, this has to have consequences. I would once again say it's very important for us in the European Union now also to coordinate our sanctions policies towards Belarus with our Western allies and partners.
And Tom, coming back to you on China, do you see a growing consensus between Britain and the EU over how to deal with China?
I do. If I may, I'm just going to build on the point that David made about Belarus, and I'll come back to your China point, because I think one of the important things that David demonstrated actually at that point was also the leadership of parliaments. And David was absolutely key to a joint letter between myself and Zygis Paviljonis in Lithuania, Norbert Röttgen in Germany, our colleague Bob Menendez in the US Senate, and indeed many others around the European Union and in other parts of the world, who signed up very quickly to a joint statement on that Sunday. And I think that was one of the influences that encouraged our governments to act quickly. Because what we're seeing, I think, is we're seeing an increasing interest of parliaments, whether at the European level or at national level, around the world, really taking a lead here, because we recognize that incidents like the forcing to the ground of a civilian aircraft over Belarus are a direct assault, not just on sort of government rules, if you like, but also on the freedoms and perhaps even the lives of our fellow citizens. So this is one of those moments where I think that our parliamentary cooperation, and David and I do it an awful lot at a foreign affairs level, but others do it in other ways too, is one of the ways that we are seeing a change in the polity of the US, of the UK, and many European states, and indeed the European Union itself, the European Parliament itself. So I think there's a change there. And I think this is where we are getting to in China. And that's why I wanted to bring it in first, because what we're also seeing is we're seeing a change in the way that countries are approaching China. What David has been modest about is he has been absolutely front and center of the negotiations over the China investment deal that was signed, or rather agreed, forgive me, by the Commission and the Chinese state only a few months ago. But he and many other very, very powerful voices in the European Parliament have spoken out. And I must say my own personal gratitude for his strength in condemning the sanctioning of me and other parliamentarians in Europe and indeed other parts of the world, and saying that this is not a state we can deal with on the basis that has currently been negotiated by our principal negotiators, whether at the European Commission or wherever, on the same basis, because actually the Chinese state is changing the deal. And so I have to say, I'm seeing a much greater level of cooperation between fellow Europeans and European Union member states and Britain and the US over China than I have done for many years. I mean, it's quite noticeable that really powerful voices in the China debate today are people like Pavel Fischer in the Czech Republic or Ulf Kristersson in Sweden. These are really impressive individuals who have made a very firm stand and are speaking out, not because they're backing America or because they're siding with Britain. They're siding with their own people. They're siding with the Czech people, the Swedish people, and other people around the world in order to stand up for the liberties that we enjoy. Because if there's one thing we should take away from the China debate, is it's not a fight between the Chinese people and the European people or the Chinese people and the American people. That's not what it's about. It's a struggle of operating systems where our operating system, for all its flaws and failures, is about understanding and valuing individual liberty and rights, the opportunity of free people and free associations to seek a prosperous and happy future, versus an operating system based on the narrow control of a single party elite and the implications that brings. That's what this is about. And that's why we are seeing really impressive leadership from many European parliaments, from many North American, Australian, and other parliaments as well, but also from important foreign affairs leaders like David.
Can I just make one comment, because now Tom has been so modest. The activities we've developed in recent months, bringing the chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the United States, the UK, the European Parliament, Germany and France together, I think it's fair to say that Tom deserves credit here. Tom can operate more like a speedboat in organising us, whereas we here in the European Union will probably more be kind of a tanker ship. It always takes us a little longer. And on the China investment agreement, I welcomed in general that the German presidency of the European Union in the second half of 2020 managed to conclude the negotiations. Of course, this was only a provisional deal, and we would have to have a very close look at all the details in the European Parliament. But in the moment, and Tom mentioned this, since a number of my colleagues have been blacklisted, just like Tom in the UK and others, and also the whole subcommittee on the human rights and other EU institutions, I don't see any appetite from the European Union to seriously deal with this agreement on the one hand, or even to adopt any kind of agreement. I don't think this was a very wise thing to do. And I thought that these retaliation measures from Beijing were totally disproportionate. And I also have the impression that this wasn't decided in Brussels, but in Beijing, because if you want the European Parliament to be involved properly, I think it's a very, very unclever thing to sanction members from all the different political groups.
Thank you. Well, that may stem from a difference of political culture, I suppose, in the case of China, that they may not quite have considered what they were doing. I'm going to go to some questions now, quite a few of which inevitably deal with some of today's difficulties. Going to start with one here, which is quite technical. Hold on. Please could the panel comment on UK-EU competition/antagonism in financial services and fisheries? I don't know who wants to take that one on first.
Well, I can start with fisheries. The agreement on fisheries shows that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is a living agreement, because now we have a transition period of 5.5 years, and afterwards we will see annual negotiations about the total allowable catch for EU fishermen in British territorial waters. So that will keep us busy. I come from near Cuxhaven and Bremerhaven up the North Sea coast. I can tell you that in the German fishing industry, people believe that there are even nicer things to do than to have annual negotiations on all the different species in the very complicated British waters. But at least we now have clarity, predictability, and in the next 5.5 years, 25% less. This will certainly have an impact on the French fishing industry, the Dutch, the Belgians, the Irish, the Danish, and the Germans. Just today, the European Parliament adopted its position on the Brexit adjustment reserve. The European Union will give in total 5 billion euros to member states to help especially those communities and those trade sectors that have been hit especially hard by Brexit, and that includes fishery, the fishing industry. So that's what I can say on fishing. And on financial services, well, we saw the Memorandum of Understanding in March, and now we are waiting for a legally binding agreement between the EU and the UK about the equivalence rules for financial operators on both sides of the channel.
Thank you. Tom, do you have anything to add on that subject?
Very briefly, look, it's hardly surprising that going through a divorce round after 40 odd years of marriage, there are areas where the discussions have been fraught. I mean, I've got friends who sadly got divorced after only 1 or 2 years, and even those negotiations weren't easy. So let's not pretend that these are surprising situations to find ourselves in. They're not. But I think one of the things that has become increasingly clear to everybody is that these conversations are going to have to continue. You know, how we work together to both exploit but also to defend the fishing stocks of the North Sea, or indeed of our common Atlantic waters, is something we need to work together on. We know that fisheries protections is an essential part of a cooperative action of coastal states. That's, you know, we're not the only ones who've discovered that, and it's not surprising that we're going to have some very serious conversations about that. And nor is it a revelation to many of us that how we deal with common financial services is going to be a challenge, because it asks really very fundamental questions about the nature of risk and the nature of intervention in our lives that the state can have, how we can invest, where we can invest, and what we can do with our money. So it's not really surprising, but it's also true that for various reasons, it is, you know, the European Union member states and indeed the UK are going to be very financially interwoven, certainly for many years to come. How long, we don't know, but for many years to come, and I hope for many decades to come, because what the UK is offering through the city is not some sort of, you know, offshore Singapore jurisdiction. It's an extremely deep, many centuries old financial market based on, yes, financial skills and financial houses that are there today. Of course it is. But it's also based on a network of professional services, legal advice, accountancy, and so much more besides, that is not, you can't just lift and shift to Frankfurt or Paris, nor Dublin, even if different services move around a bit within capitals and within different states. So this is one of those areas where, whichever position you took on Brexit, the reality is we are only 20 miles off the coast of northern France. We are very, very tightly connected. And the truth is capital markets in London are connected to capital requirements across the continent.
May I just add one point? Fisheries, financial services, these are all important issues we will have to deal with. But in the moment, the most pressing issue is how to move on as regards the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. And if I followed Vice President Šefčovič's statement correctly, he said that we are now at a bifurcation. And indeed, this is really of great concern for us. The full implementation of the withdrawal agreement for us is a litmus test for trust and confidence in the UK. And I don't believe that we can carry on like this. The implementation of the protocol in good faith is a total necessity. The European Union will be ready to find pragmatic solutions to facilitate everyday life in Northern Ireland, but we have to be clear that the protocol cannot be scrapped, the protocol cannot be renegotiated. We really need a stronger British commitment to implement the protocol. It's very unfortunate that obviously the joint committee meeting in London didn't find a breakthrough. And if things continue like this, then the European Union might not have any other choice than to consider all the tools and the options at its disposal to ensure a return to compliance. Because it's very unfortunate. We don't want this in Brussels, but we have to be clear that the protocol is not the problem. The protocol is part of the solution of a problem which name is Brexit, and especially the kind of Brexit the UK government decided to go for. I have to mention this because I cannot discuss EU-UK relations with my friend Tom Tugendhat without really trying to make clear that this is really a pressing issue for us in the European Parliament, and I would say across party lines.
Thanks, David. Well, I'm going to ask a question from someone that's closely related to that. One of our audience members has just come back from Northern Ireland, and it's quite an interesting angle he's taken on this. So he says that he observes deep unhappiness from the unionist community at the so-called Irish sea border. So I think what he's suggesting is even if the protocol were implemented, you would still have the unhappiness of the unionist community towards it. So his question, and this is your chance to snap up your Nobel Peace Prize, is how can we de-escalate the situation and reduce tensions whilst honouring both the spirit and the letter of the agreement?
I can see you're looking at me, Catherine, and I'm afraid I'm not gonna be going to Oslo anytime soon, and I won't be getting the white tie out. Look, this is a real challenge, okay, and you know, it was a challenge that many of us spoke about in 2014 and 15, because there was fundamentally a choice, and Boris has chosen to put the border in the Irish Sea. It was a choice he made, and he made it because of the requirements of the agreement that he came to. And you know, Boris's border is what is there now, right? The challenge we've got is how do we make sure that technical requirements on food safety or customs do not interfere with the valid and entirely legitimate political rights of a unionist community that feels and wants to remain part of the United Kingdom. Now, you'll forgive me, I speak here as a firm unionist in the sense that I believe in the civic union that is the United Kingdom. I believe it offers opportunity for individual rights and liberties of many different communities within our kingdom. And I'm extremely proud of many of the things that we've achieved in the 300 years we've been together. One of those things that we've achieved in the face of extraordinary challenge alongside Ireland. And that, of course, is the Anglo-Irish Agreement, first of all, under Margaret Thatcher and Gerrit Fitzgerald, and then later the Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace to an incredibly troubled province, of course, but also brought peace, let's not forget, to us in London and indeed in Kent. You know, the spate of bombings and attacks that the IRA brought to the UK was not limited to that part of the UK that is on the island of Ireland. It was to the whole of the UK. And so I have to say, I think the Good Friday Agreement is an extremely important foundational text for us. And that's why, as I hear David's points, and he knows that I have nothing but respect for him and for what he is seeking to achieve, which I understand is quite legitimate defense of the single market and protection of the rules-based system that has led to many liberties and much prosperity amongst not just the 27, but actually amongst many neighboring states as well. But it's also true that, you know, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And we need to find ways in which we approach these conversations in ways that respect the legitimate political views of all communities in Northern Ireland. Now, that is a real challenge. And I'm not going to pretend that it's easy. And I'm not going to pretend that all sides have made it easy or made it easier. And David, you can smile at that because you know what I'm referring to. But the reality is this is a really difficult conversation. And the answer for nobody is to seek to be, erect the kind of obstacles that could lead to a reversal. So I do understand the position that David comes from. And by the way, I have huge respect for the position of the Irish government in seeking to maintain the integrity of their position within the single market, of course, which is entirely legitimate and entirely up to the Irish people, not up to us. But finding ways in which we can, interpret the different travel arrangements, I think, is important. And looking at where we can be flexible and where we can look differently is also important.
Thank you.
Tommy's right. Right from the beginning, we all knew it would be a political challenge to leave the customs union and the single market, and on the other hand, avoid a hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland. And we discussed many different options. And I think it's fair to say that what we have then found at the end, after painstaking negotiations called the protocol, wasn't the first British option. I remember that we used to discuss the backstop. But this protocol now is, in the end, nothing else than trying to square the circle. And three priorities are important for the European Union: to avoid a hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, to enable the smooth functioning of the All-Ireland economy, and to safeguard the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, but also to ensure the integrity of our single market. And now, what could we do to move on? I believe that I welcome that as a first step, the EU and the UK have jointly identified a common list of issues requiring discussion. That's fine. And both sides are starting to engage in intensive technical discussions aiming to prepare a ideally joint, I would call it, work plan for the pathway to full compliance. But we have identified the issues, but what we're not seeing in the moment is a clear British commitment and significant progress on such a roadmap. On the sanitary issues, the simple solution would be to adopt a veterinary agreement whereby rules are aligned dynamically. We have something similar with Switzerland. This would eliminate most checks and controls in the Irish Sea, but obviously the UK government is not ready to follow this suggestion yet. So let me once again underline, I fully understand the sensitivities in Northern Ireland, especially in the loyalist unionist communities. And the European Union is trying to find a pragmatic and flexible solution. But what we do need to see is a clear commitment that sooner than later, the protocol needs to be fully implemented. And the final point, if I hear some British politicians talking about permanent flexibility, well, sorry, permanent flexibility is the opposite of flexibility. So we can be flexible, but in the end, we have to stick to our rules. And this protocol, by the way, has not been imposed by the European Union on the UK and the people in Northern Ireland. It was negotiated by both sides, and the withdrawal agreement carries the signature of the UK Prime Minister then, and now his name is Boris Johnson.
Thank you. Penny.
Yeah, I reappeared to say thank you, and I'm thrilled to have listened to that conversation and slightly dazzled by everything you both have been saying, and David, especially your last comment. I think it's a rather perplexing and frustrating place to finish, because I'm sure that Tom would love to come back, and I have absolutely no doubt the questions are still flowing from the audience. So I'm sorry to have to wrap this up. I really am sorry. But it has been the most extraordinary hour. And I was just thinking, we were joined by an ambassador at the beginning, but we've clearly been joined by two other diplomats for the last hour. And it's been fantastic to listen to you, despite the challenges that are around at the moment and ahead. A fantastic history lesson, Tom. Thank you very much. And great to hear references to happy marriages and slightly tetchy divorces, which I think understandably are normal. And David, lovely to hear you talk about this, the need for pragmatism and flexibility. So thank you, Tom, thank you, David, and Catherine. From me and the Aspen Institute in the UK, and from our co-host, the EU delegation in the UK, a fascinating hour. We've learned a huge amount, and really grateful for your time and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best, Tom. Hope to see you soon.
See you very soon, David. Lovely to see you in Strasbourg.
In London or wherever. Keep going, and looking forward to our next joint initiative. You're the speedboat, I'm the tanker.
And with that, both of you, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.